Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Kevin Hickman. I am a certified level 3 internal family systems practitioner, and I have been professionally trained by the IFS Institute. So now let's go ahead and dive right into the reason why we are all here today. So you're probably either here because you're just wanting to learn about IFS, or you yourself or someone you know is probably struggling with difficult emotions and behaviors. So either way, you've come to the right place. If you're like me, you've probably already tried different therapeutic models or spirituality or something similar. And although many of these have some really useful tools, they never seem to achieve the level of change that we're actually looking for. IFS is the only model that I personally have used that actually made complete logical sense. And it didn't require me to take someone else's word on what I was experiencing or what I was going to experience. IFS shows that we have a very predictable set of patterns, and it explains why we think and behave the way that we do. But the thing that I really love about IFS the most is that it goes beyond the patterns and it finds the source of what's causing the patterns, and it gives us the tools to heal the source. So one last thing that I want to mention before we take a look at what IFS actually is I would like to take a moment to formally recognize the person who made all of this possible. And that person is Dr. Richard Schwartz. He's the one who developed the IFS model and also founded the IFS Institute, which is where I received my training and my certification. So now let's go ahead and take a look at what IFS actually is. So IFS views the mind not as a single personality, but as a network of subpersonalities that are all working together. In IFS, these subpersonalities are called parts. Each part has a very specific function called a job or a role. We often refer to these parts by the job they perform. So I'm going to give you an example. You probably have a part that criticizes yourself and criticizes other people, right? We call this part the critic. And another part of you may feel shame when you get criticized. So there's two parts right there, right? We actually have probably somewhere between 35, 40 parts. Don't get overwhelmed thinking that we have 35, 40 parts. In an actual session with clients, multiple sessions, I never see more than about 10, 15 at the most. And you'll learn these parts of yourself very, very quickly. And they're very, again, the jobs they do is what we call the name of the part. So it all comes together very, very quickly. So if we look at all these parts collectively, we call it an internal family system, right? It's just like a real family, but it's internal, it's inside your mind. Okay. And they interact with each other just like you do with your actual family members. So the best way to explain what IFS is to show you how I actually use it in real sessions with clients. As an IFS practitioner, I like to start all my sessions with my clients by giving them 3 to 5 minutes to just talk, right? And during this time when they're talking, I'm just listening and I'm watching for them to switch parts during the middle of their conversation. And I'm noting what these parts are and what the part said. Okay. So to give you an example of how this works, I've created a short video of something that a client might say at the beginning of a session. So let's go ahead and start this video. And then after the video, we're going to come back and we're going to break it down into parts so you can really understand what IFS is. So let's go ahead and start this video.
I had kind of a tough week. We had some family come over to the house and they barely even gave us any notice. And they stayed the entire day. Then my sister had the nerve to ask what I'm making us for dinner. I am so mad at her. I started to say no, but then I thought, they drove all this way to see you. How can you be so mean? I felt really guilty. So as usual, I just sucked it up and said, sure, I can make us something. I felt so much resentment, but I did it anyway. And then after I made this huge meal, everyone just sat there watching TV and laughing while I had to do all the cleanup. I got so angry that I eventually just shut down and didn't want to talk to anyone for the rest of the night.
So you might be asking yourself, why didn't this woman just tell her family no? Seems simple enough, right? What you don't see in this video is that in previous sessions with this woman, I learned that her father left the family when she was only 4 years old. Because of that, her mother had to work two jobs and could not see her daughter very often. When mom was home, she would be very loving towards the daughter. The problem is the little girl never knew when she would see her mom again since mom worked so often. So with dad leaving and mom being gone a lot, the little girl developed what is known as anxious attachment or preoccupied attachment. This means she has a deep fear of abandonment. This is why, as an adult, she cannot say no to her friends and family because her little inner child is so scared that they may leave her if she says no, which would trigger that abandonment, right? So, for this reason, this woman developed several parts to protect that little girl from being abandoned. So now let's go ahead and take a look at which parts of this woman protected her little 4-year-old girl from abandonment. We'll also see what actually happens when her parts protect. So I broke this woman's conversation down into two paragraphs. Okay, on this first slide is the first half of her conversation. So I'm going to head and read that, and then I'm going to show you the parts as they happen in the order that they happen. Okay, so I had kind of a tough week. We had some family come over to the house, and they barely even gave us any notice, and they stayed the entire day. Then my sister had the nerve to ask, what am I going to make us for dinner? I am so mad at her. I started to say no, but then I thought, they drove all this way to see you. How can you be so mean? I felt really guilty. Okay, now let's break these parts down. And again, this is in the order of which they happen. So you notice the first one there in gray that says, the sister asking, what are you going to make us for dinner? Okay, you look below that, number one, this is her little 4-year-old exile, and she feels really hurt when the sister asks that. So when the sister says, what are you making us for dinner? Instead of asking if the woman would be willing to make dinner if she helped, the exile felt really hurt and believes that she is being taken advantage of. So now let's go to the second part, which you see in red here is a protector part. The parts that are, say, protector parts in red, keep in mind those are protecting the exile from abandonment, okay? So as soon as the little exile feels hurt, this activates an angry part that wants to protect the exile when she feels her pain, and the little exile perceives the sister is taking advantage of her. This causes this angry part to get angry and want to say no. That doesn't say she said no, it says she wants to say no, right? When she wants to say no, her little exile can sense that the angry part is about to tell her sister no, right? This makes the little exile get scared that the sister will abandon her by leaving and never coming back. Okay, when she gets scared and worries about abandonment, the little critic now jumps in, which again is a protector part. They drove all this way to see you. How can you be so mean? This inner critic senses the exile's fear of abandonment and decides it's time to protect her. The inner critic has a lot of power and can activate several other protective parts, as you'll see in this next slide. Okay, so let's go to the last part that gets activated, which again is the exile. Okay, I felt really guilty. So the words of the inner critic make the exile feel guilty. This is because the inner critic activated one of the exile's core beliefs, which is, I am bad. So on this second slide, we see the second half of this woman's conversation to me, followed by a breakdown of the parts in the order in which they happen. So let's go ahead and start at the top, and I'll finish reading what the woman said to me. So as usual, I just sucked it up and said, sure, I can make us something. I felt so much resentment, but I did it anyway. And then after I made this huge meal, everyone just sat there watching TV and laughing while I had to do all the cleanup. I got so angry that I eventually just shut down and didn't want to talk to anybody for the rest of the night. Okay, so let's start with the first part here that's highlighted in the light pink up there. Number one, which is again a protector part, it's the caretaker. When the woman said, I just sucked it up, the caretaker prevented abandonment and protected the sister's feelings by stopping the angry part from saying no. Let's go to the second part, highlighted in light green there, number two. Protector part, once again, which is the people pleaser. Sure, I can make us something. The people pleaser part is the one who does acts of service, which is cooking and cleanup. And I'm going to pause for just a second here. I want to clarify the difference between the caretaker and the people pleaser. The caretaker caretakes the other person's feelings and emotions, right? Not the exile's feeling emotions, okay? But all it does is basically prevents the angry part from saying no. So it really doesn't do much. It just basically stops the person from saying no. Whereas the people pleaser is the one who actually does acts of service for other people. Again, not for itself, for other people. Okay, let's go ahead and jump on to the third part that came in here, and that is the resentment part. Right. So after the people pleaser agrees, says, sure, I can make us something, it causes woman to feel a great deal of resentment because the caretaker prioritized the sister's feelings over her own exile's feelings. Okay. So when this part got resentment, we jump down to the fourth part, which again is the exile. The exile felt a tremendous amount of pain when it heard the guest having fun while the people pleaser part did the dishes and cleaned up the kitchen. And when this little exile got hurt, who do you see show up again, as it did earlier in the conversation? The angry part. So, number five, the angry part felt the pain of the exile, which made it angry. Okay. Then our next part comes in. I eventually just shut down. This is the shutdown part. The reason it comes in is because the angry part became so intense from getting angry multiple times that the shutdown part was afraid that it was going to activate the firefighter, which is the rage part, right? So the shutdown part comes and says, okay, I got to prevent that. If I let this rageful firefighter part come out, that rage part's going to go into the living room and just really let the sister have it, right? We can't have that because that is definitely going to cause abandonment in her eyes. Okay, so let's go down to the very last part, number seven, final protective part, which is the avoider. I didn't want to talk to anyone for the rest of the night. This kept the angry part away from other people to avoid further activation, which again could have sent the rageful part, which is a firefighter, into lashing out at the sister. And I know I'm mentioning the word firefighter here, and I haven't mentioned that anywhere else. So I just very quickly want to explain that most of these parts, these protector parts you see in red, they're what we call managers, which are proactive, right? They try to keep things in control. Whereas a firefighter part, like rage, is reactive. So now let's do a quick review. If you recall, at the beginning of this video, I told you that we all have predictive patterns that can explain how we think and behave the way that we do. So if you take a look at this slide, I'm just going to run through the parts very quickly. This is the pattern. This whole slide that I'm showing you here, this is the pattern that I spoke about. Very predictive. We do the same pattern over and over and over, hundreds, if not thousands of times throughout our life. So let's just run through it real quick. Okay, you start with the little inner child, the exile. Exile's hurt when she perceives the sister as taking advantage of her. Angry part feels the exile's pain and wants to protect her from the sister. The angry part starts to tell the sister no. Exile gets scared that the sister may leave and never come back if the angry part tells her sister no. She believes she will be abandoned. Critic feels that the exile's fear of abandonment, so it criticizes the angry part for wanting to say no. This is where things get very interesting and a strategy takes place. The exile hears the critic and feels guilty because it activates one of the exile's core beliefs: I am bad. The exile now needs to be protected from abandonment and it needs to feel as though it's good. So the caretaker protects abandonment by sucking it up, which means stay quiet, and preventing the angry part from saying no. It caretakes the sister's emotions. Then the people pleaser must now fix the problem of the exile feeling as though it's bad. So it does acts of service for others, cooks and cleans up. The resentment part got activated by the caretaker and the people pleaser, placing the sister's needs above the exile's needs. The exile feels hurt by hearing everyone's laughter while people pleaser cleans up. Angry part feels the exile's pain once again and wants to protect. The shutdown part fears that anger will get so intense that the rageful firefighter will scream at the sister, so it shuts the angry part down. The avoider avoids people for the rest of the night to prevent the angry part from getting further activated. So again, this slide is the pattern, very predictable, happens thousands and thousands of times throughout this woman's life. Now that I've shown you the pattern, I want to show you the source of what's causing the pattern. And that source, as you see highlighted here in the red boxes, is the exile. It's the exile's core beliefs, which are I am bad and I am unworthy, coupled with its fear of abandonment that's driving this entire pattern. So now let's do a quick summary of the protectors and the exile. Although these protectors are working very hard to protect the exile from being abandoned and from feeling like she's bad and unworthy, they actually end up causing the very things that they are trying to prevent. So how did the protectors cause that? The critic activated the exile's core belief, I am bad, by criticizing. The caretaker and the people pleaser abandoned the exile by placing the sister's feelings and emotions above her own. This abandonment activated the exile's core belief, I am unworthy. By activating these core beliefs, we live with unwanted feelings and emotions. So, how do we stop the pattern? By working with that which is causing the pattern, the exile's beliefs, which are caused by trauma. So, how do we work with the exile? To work with the exile, we must first work with those parts that protect the exile. Once we have heard, felt, seen, appreciated, and validated the protectors, they will eventually give us access to the exile. In order for this to happen, we must create a parts to self relationship. In other words, the self must earn the trust of the parts as they build a secure attachment to the self. The protectors need to trust that the self can handle the exile's strong emotions. Next, we're going to take a look at how to work with the protectors. So before we can start working with the protector, we need to find what we call the target protector, which simply means which protector do you want to start working with. So if you refer back to the video that we showed of the woman speaking to the practitioner earlier in this video, okay, and let's say you were at the end of that video, the practitioner would now say back to this woman, I can see where this could be really tough for you. It's hard to have your family show up like that and then expect you to perform for them. The client might say something like, thank you for saying that. Yes, this has been very hard. Practitioner, would it be okay if I read my notes back to you? Yes, of course. Okay, so the practitioner would start by saying, so let's take a moment to review the parts of you that I just noticed. I would like you to close your eyes and not think as I read these parts back to you. I noticed a part of you asked how you could be so mean. Another part felt guilty and hurt. Another part stopped you from telling your sister no. Another part felt resentment. A part felt angry. A part felt shut down. And a part avoided. So, which of these parts feels that it needs our attention the most right now? Not which part do you think needs our attention? Okay, so the purpose of this is to find, again, the target part. Which protector are we going to start with? Once the client has chosen a target part, the practitioner will usually ask them to take a moment and ask inside themselves if there are any parts that have concerns with us working with this target part. Okay, now that we have found our target part, we're ready to start applying the IFS model to that part. And it's important to know that in the sample 6Fs as shown below, we're mainly demonstrating how to work with the protectors. Although we still use the 6Fs with the exile, the questions will be considerably different. This is because the exile is the only part that does not have a job. The exile has beliefs, feelings, emotions, and trauma. Another reminder is as the practitioner works with the part below and other parts, all the protected parts, it's important to remind the person not to think after you ask the question. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the 6Fs right after we find our target part. Okay, so the first one is we want to find where this part is in or around the body. Okay, so say it's an angry part, right? We say, where do you notice this angry part in or around your body? And then we go to the second of the 6Fs, which is focus. I would like you to focus on that body part, say the bicep, the stomach, the chest, whatever the body part is, and really get curious about the physical sensation. And again, here's what we tell them not to think. Don't try to figure anything out or analyze. Just focus on the physical sensation with curiosity. Okay. Then we go to the third of the 6Fs, which is flesh out. Okay. This is where we're trying to learn more about the part. Okay. As they focus and they're just using intuition, no thinking, we start asking them questions. What does this feel like? Are there any feelings or emotions associated with it? Are there any words or images? Right. And then the practitioners just sitting in silence. Again, we're letting the client use intuition to get the answers to these questions. Okay. Once the part starts emerging, then we go to the fourth of the 6Fs, which is how do you feel toward this part right now? And this has two purposes, right? One, we're checking to see if they're in self or have self energy, we're also checking to see or if there are any other parts present. So I'm going to give you an example. If say the target part is a numbing part that numbs the body so the person can't feel any emotions, right? When we say, how do you feel towards this part right now? Another part may show up and say, I hate that part. I'm angry at that part for numbing, right? So we know that that is not one of the eight C's of self. We know they're not in self, right? So we need to address that part and its concerns before we come back to this target part. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the fifth of the six F's. Even though it starts with a B, befriend, right? It's still the F friend. This is where we start building a self to part relationship. So you notice above the red self, everything else is the word practitioner. That's where the practitioner is asking the client questions directly. But now we want the self to start asking the questions. Again, we're building a relationship between the self and the parts. Okay. So self would ask questions like, can you tell me more about what you do? Now, a lot of times we already know what the part does because the person may have said, I want to start with the numbing part or I want to start with the angry part, right? So you don't want it to tell you what it does because we already know what it does. Okay. So then you might ask some more questions like, what is this like for you to have to do this? And is it okay if I take a moment to feel this for myself? Right? This really shows how important this part is to you, that you're willing to take that time to feel what it's like to be this part. Okay. And then you validate back to that part. Wow, I can really feel how hard that is for you. Right. Then you ask them, what are you hoping to achieve by doing this? Okay. And once they explain this, then you really show appreciation for how hard this part has had to work all these years for you by doing their job and preventing whatever it is that they're preventing. Okay. And then you would ask, do you know how old I am? And the part will usually think that you're their age, because keep in mind, this is where we're just introducing self to the part. So the part really doesn't even know who self is yet. Okay. So they're usually going to tell you some age that is their own age. Okay. And I just want to add one little thing here. Most parts, in my experience, are going to be between the ages of 2 and 7 years old. Okay. Now there are older parts, teenage parts, whatever. There also can be pre-verbal parts, but for the most part, most of the parts are between the ages of 2 and 7 years old. Okay, so once you ask them how old they are, they give you an age that is the same as their age. Then you want to start having self update the part how old it really is in current time, right? And you want self to describe itself using the eight C's. Now that we have befriended the part and started forming a relationship between the self and the part, we go to the last of the six F's, which is fears. Okay, this is where the self asks the part, what are you concerned would happen if you didn't do this job? Right? We're trying to find out what its fear is. Okay. And usually the answer is something that would eventually lead us to the exile. So I've created an example here to show you how this could work. Okay. In this example, right, if this were the angry part, it might say something like, if I didn't get angry, then I would be vulnerable. And the self would say, and if you were vulnerable, what do you think might happen? And the angry part would say, someone could take advantage of me. And the self, and if someone did take advantage of you, what would that mean about you? And the angry part, here's where it reveals the exile. It might say something like that I was stupid and weak. Okay. And then you notice I put a little comment down here. Notice in this example, although the angry part says I would be vulnerable and I would be taken advantage of and I would be stupid and I would be weak, it's actually talking about the exile. Right. So, in a way you can verify that is you can ask the angry part. So, I noticed that you get angry. Are you also the one who feels stupid and weak? And usually they'll pause for a moment, again, using intuition, not thinking, and they'll see that they are not the same one who feels stupid and weak, and they'll tell you that. Okay. So then we go back to self, which says, if I could help this part of you who believes they're stupid and weak, and you didn't have to protect them anymore, what would you rather do? And when we ask this question, what would you rather do? Usually the most common answer I get is, I have no idea. I don't know what I would rather do. And the reason for that is their entire world is just getting angry, right? Each part only has a single function. They don't do multiple functions. So when you ask them, what would you rather do? They don't have any other experience other than getting angry, right? So something I like to ask a lot of times when they say, I don't have any clue, I'll ask them because now I know their age, which they revealed earlier. I'll say, have you ever seen other children around your age doing something that you wished you could do that? And this really seems to work. It gets them to thinking, and usually they will come up with an answer. Another common thing is they may say, I actually don't want to do anything. I just want to rest. So they don't always want to take on some other job or necessarily go play or whatever. Okay. And then the last thing we ask them in this, the last of the six apps, which is fear, is what else do you need from me? What else do you need from the self? Once you have worked through the necessary protectors and have been given permission to work with the exile, there are four additional steps that is required for the exile. And keep in mind that the exile holds very strong emotions, which can be overwhelming. Even more importantly, it also holds the trauma which caused the beliefs and emotions. Since this is only meant to be an introduction, we're not going to get into the specifics of how to work with trauma. Okay, so once you have worked with the exile's trauma and you've gone through the steps with the exile, now we get to the four remaining and final steps. The first of those four steps is retrieval. In the retrieval step, we're working toward getting the exile out of the place where it is stuck. Okay, this could be a dark void, it could be a bedroom from the childhood home or some other place. Okay, once the exile is open to being retrieved, we want to find out where it would like to go. Usually, it wants to come and live with the self in the current time. However, it may sometimes choose an imaginary place or a relative's home. Something I see fairly common is what was the exile's safe place when it was little, which may be the grandparents' home. Okay. Once you've done the retrieval stage and you've brought the exile out of this place that it's stuck, we want to unburden the exile. Okay, so in this next step, the unburdening step, we're helping the exile get rid of the beliefs that it carries about itself. We ask the exile where it carries each belief in its body. We then ask it to imagine each belief as an object. So, for example, they might imagine the belief, I'm stupid, as a book that has no words. We then ask them, how would you like to get rid of that book? Would you like to bury it? Do you want to throw it in the wind, toss it in a fire, or throw it into the deep blue ocean? You notice with these questions here that we're using the four elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. Okay. Once we go through the unburdening stage, we've unburdened all of the different beliefs that they carry about themselves. We move on to the third step, which is the invitation step. In the invitation step, we ask the exile what qualities would it like to invite back into its life. Usually, these are qualities that were either taken from the exile due to their trauma or qualities that they may have never gotten in the first place. So, some examples of these qualities might include freedom, autonomy, agency, happiness, power, intelligence, playfulness, joy. or spontaneity. Okay. Once we've invited all of their qualities back in, we go to the final step, which is integration. In the integration step, we want to check in with all the other parts to see if they have any comments, questions, or concerns about the work that we just did with the exile. We use this time to answer their questions and address any concerns that they might have. And we close our session by thanking all of the parts for making this possible. So, what is self energy? In IFS, self energy is defined as the 8 C's of self, which you see on the right side of the screen here is compassion, curiosity, clarity, creativity, calm, confidence, courage, and connectedness. But if you look on the left side of the screen, there's 3 more elements that I would like to add to the self, and those are awareness, mindfulness, and intuition. So let's go ahead and take a look at these 3 additional elements, and then we're going to take a look at the 8 C's of self in more detail. Awareness is the ability to notice our external and internal environment. Awareness does not include the ability to recognize, perceive, or give focused attention. It can be thought of as an indiscernible observation. It cannot distinguish one object, thought, or sensation from another. It only notices. Now let's look at mindfulness. Mindfulness, on the other hand, does have the ability to distinguish one object, thought, or sensation from another. Mindfulness also has the ability to focus on a specific object, thought, or sensation. Mindfulness does not include any analysis, opinion, or reactivity. Taking a look at intuition. Intuition is what happens before the mind has a chance to think. In some teachings, intuition is referred to as prajna, which translates to before knowledge. In self energy, we use intuition to know things in a way that is far more accurate than thought. In IFS, you will often hear Dick Schwartz say, "Don't think," right after he asks a part a question. If you start thinking right after you ask yourself a question, you're actually switching to a different part of yourself that is trying to figure out the answer. And we call this the figure it out part. Okay. The original part that was asked the question already knows the answer. The figure it out or thinking part actually ends up blocking the target part from answering the question. Intuition is also used when not asking yourself a question. So, for example, if you're in a room full of people and you're fully aware without thought or speech, you may actually feel it when someone is staring at you. You just feel it without thought. Intuition is also used to sense danger and to navigate life. It's interesting to note that when we get information from intuition, our self doubt or suspicious part is often the first one to show up and question the validity of the information. This is almost always because the information is true and the protector parts are uncomfortable with this truth. Now let's take a look at the 8 C's of self as defined in IFS. The first of the 8 C's is compassion. Compassion is an automatic response to the realization that a part of you or someone else is suffering. This realization is also coupled with an intention to alleviate the suffering. This can be tricky if you have a strong caretaker part. If that is the case, and you do have a strong caretaker part, you might see someone suffering with strong emotions, and you may get an impulse to caretake their emotions. This is different from compassion. You can usually tell the difference with a little bit of curiosity. So, caretaking feels like you have to caretake the person. You have to, it's your job to fix their emotions, or you're going to feel like you're a bad person. This will eventually make you resentful. Compassion, on the other hand, feels good and it feels natural. Compassion comprises several elements. The first being you have to notice that a part of you or someone else is suffering. Next, your body has an automatic response, which is a form of empathy, meaning you can feel what the part or the person is feeling without becoming fully blended with that part. Third, you can feel a somatic gravitation toward the part or the person. Fourth, you stay calm as you speak softly to that part or person. You listen without judgment or advice. You may offer touch to the person if they feel safe enough to allow you to do that. You're not trying to analyze or fix anything. It's all about the part or the person's feeling as though they are not alone in their experience and that someone actually cares. Now let's take a look at the second of the 8 C's, which is curiosity. Curiosity is having a genuine interest in what is happening within yourself, another person, or within the world. Curiosity does not have an agenda or a demand that leads to a certain outcome. Curiosity is a primary driving force in IFS. If we had no curiosity, we would just assume that everything the parts say and do is correct, and there would be no need for change. Curiosity is what exposes how the internal family system works and why it works that way. It's also what leads us to the exile that is so closely guarded by the protectors. Curiosity overcomes the barriers posed by concepts and assumptions. We often form beliefs about something to protect us from knowing a deeper truth. I've seen many people use the same word to represent something, but with a little curiosity, I find it has an entirely different meaning for each person. As we get older, we can be so controlled by fear-based protectors that we eventually lose curiosity. In this case, studies have shown that a lack of curiosity leads to a lack of openness. A lack of curiosity and openness leads to a shorter lifespan. Now let's look at the third of the 8 C's, which is clarity. Clarity allows you to be fully aware of parts, thoughts, sensations, and wisdom, all without thought itself. Here's an example of clarity. Let's say you're working with yourself and you ask a part a question. After asking the question, you don't do any thinking and you just allow the answer to come to you through intuition. When you sense the answer, it feels really clear without any doubt, judgment, or reactivity. This is clarity. You're very clear that this is the truth without question. As long as you don't let self-doubt, analyzer, or any other parts have an opinion about the answer, then you will remain very clear. There is no filter or editing of the answer. Another way to think of clarity is to consider reality versus your perception of reality. Reality is very clear, unedited, factual, and undisputed. As soon as you process reality through your perception, it's no longer clear. With the added perception and mental formation, the clarity has left and now become a state of consciousness, or as we call it in IFS, you are now fully blended with a part, which means you can no longer notice the part because you are the part. Taking a look at the fourth of the 8 C's, which is creativity. Creativity is deeply associated with curiosity. In order to be creative, you must first set out to explore by that innate drive to be curious. As the self or the practitioner gathers raw data through curiosity, the mind uses intuition, imagination, and thought to generate new creative ways to help the parts. This is why you may see such a wide array of effectiveness from one person to another. Those who work strictly from a governed set of tools are extremely limited in their ability to help themselves or their clients. In my experience, IFS is an art form rather than a set of strict regulations, tools, and methods. We are constantly learning. We don't want to fall into that trap of thinking we have now accumulated the perfect tools that will work on everyone. We will always be exploring and flowing with what exists in the current moment, not what was in another moment. The fifth C of the eight C's is calm. Calm is our natural state when no parts are present. You could also think of calm as equanimity. Equanimity is the ability to be fully present with all that is happening internally and externally without reactivity. But of course, we have a lot of things happening around us throughout the day. We also have our own thoughts that are activating parts all day long. You can easily get taken out of self energy by a part. When this happens, you can use mindfulness. With mindfulness, you can notice a contraction somewhere in the body accompanied by thoughts. The contraction holds their narration in place, so it doesn't make sense to interact with the narration. Instead, focus on the contraction, but keep in mind we're not trying to recover images and memories like we do when we're working with trauma. Instead, you want to feel compassion for the contraction. While doing that, start taking slow, deep belly breaths with one hand gently soothing the area of the contraction. Continue this until you have returned to a state of calm. Notice the practice I just described does not include thought. It is entirely somatic. I use this when I'm working with clients in case any parts of me get activated. I need to keep my focus on the client so I don't have time to interact with my parts. This technique will allow you to stay calm and still be fully present with yourself or your client. The sixth of the eight C's is confidence. Confidence is related to the trust that parts have in the self. So, what does that actually look like? I can recall times when my little worrying part would show up in the middle of a session with a client. It might say things like, "Oh no, I don't know where I'm going in this session. Nothing seems to make sense." When I would hear this, I could feel the anxiety in my little exile. The worrying part was trying to get my figured out part to get in there and make sense of things. But that wasn't necessary because using awareness, which is the noticer, and then mindfulness, I was able to catch what was happening. Then I was able to have good self energy. Along with a little help from a speaking part, it gently said, "I have no idea where we're going either, but we don't need to know. It will all work out well by the end of the session." I quickly felt the anxiety disappear. The parts felt that self was confident, so they didn't have to worry. I have actually had this happen on numerous occasions, and it always turns out the same way. The seventh of the eight C's is courage. Courage is the most powerful of the eight C's related to making actual change in your life. Courage is taking the action even when parts are trying to stop you and your little exile is scared. This does not mean that a tough guy part muscles its way through things even though you feel fear. That is not courage. That is dismissive avoidance. Dismissive avoidance would see the fear as a weakness. It would dismiss that this part of you needs any attention and avoid the scared parts altogether. Real courage is the ability to be honest with yourself when you feel fear and to address the concerns of the scared parts. You start by feeling compassion for the parts. You ask them what they're concerned about. You feel it as they are telling you. You validate them. You reassure them that you can calmly handle things so they don't have to. Once the fear has subsided, you carry out the action that they feared. Afterward, you check back in with the scared parts to see what was that like for them. This helps the parts update their perceptions so they are less reactive the next time something similar arises. Without the courage to take action between sessions, you will see very little progress. The eighth and final of the eight C's is connectedness. Connectedness is one of my personal favorite aspects of the self. Connectedness is not just about being connected to the client, it also means being fully connected to yourself and your intuition. You may sometimes hear a practitioner say, I really felt like we were in the zone during that session. This is what they are referring to. It's almost as though something outside of yourself is running the session and you are just the observer. There is no separation between you, the client, and the guidance of intuition. When I'm working with a client and they're speaking from a part or for a part, I actually feel what it's like to be that part. There is no reaction from my own part during the experience. I'm not analyzing or thinking in those moments. When parts communicate with you verbally or through images, memories, and sensations, feel what they are telling you. Don't think about it, or you will more than likely get it wrong. Use mindfulness to register what is being witnessed and intuition to see the bigger picture. Welcome back. Now that you have a better understanding of IFS, I would like to leave you with something to consider. If you get anxiety throughout the day, watch for your worrying part that usually starts its thoughts with, what if this happens? Or what if that happens? Another common part that causes anxiety is your reminder part that keeps running through all the list of things that you have to do that day. If you feel hopeless or depressed, more than likely you either had anxiety that needed to be lowered or your replayer part keeps replaying things that you've done or said in the past. As it does that, your parts that judge and criticize you are usually more than happy to share their opinion about you. If you often get resentful, your caretaker and people pleaser parts may be placing others' needs above your own. And when you get an intention to start something new, watch for those parts that may want to look at social media, watch TV, exercise, eat something, or find other things that need to be done first. The most common reason that parts stop you from starting something new is that they're afraid you will either make a mistake or fail altogether, which would cause you to feel shame. All of these examples that I've just shared with you are very predictable parts, all working together to protect you from hidden beliefs that you have about yourself. These beliefs are the driving force that causes our behaviors, emotions, and the choices we make. They keep us from having successful relationships. They also keep us in relationships that we should have left years ago. They keep us from doing the things that really give us purpose and joy. And they set limits on what we can and cannot do. And most of all, they keep us from being true to ourselves in fear of what others might think. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in yourself. As you go forward, stay curious about what you discovered here today. I look forward to seeing all of you again very soon. Thank you.